Sagittarius, what's coming to you is unheard of. God is waiting, and abundance is on the way. Sagittarius, take a moment. Close your eyes just for a breath and feel the quiet energy around you. There is something unusual in the air, subtle, sacred, and unmistakable. Not everyone will notice it, but you are not just anyone. You've always known when the winds begin to shift, even before the clouds move. And right now your soul is whispering, something is coming. Not something ordinary, not something you've seen before. This is different. This is destiny folding in on itself. This is a once-in-a-lifetime alignment between heaven and the firelight within your own chest. What's approaching isn't here to test you anymore. It's here to reward the part of you that never gave up. It's not the result of effort or planning or proof. It is the return of a divine promise made long ago to a soul that dared to burn bright, even when surrounded by darkness. But before it arrives, the universe has a message. One that doesn't come through logic or noise, but through resonance. You'll only hear it if you listen, not with your ears, but with your spirit. So stay with me, Sagittarius, because what's coming next will challenge everything you thought was possible, but only in the most beautiful way. And in this message, I will walk with you gate by gate, until you reach what's already waiting for you on the other side of surrender. Let us begin. Gate 1, the tremor within. When the soul begins to shift before the world does. Sagittarius, sometimes the earth does not need to crack for you to know something has changed. Sometimes there is no lightning, no breaking news, no grand event. And yet you feel it. A subtle tremor beneath the surface of your everyday life. You wake up and something feels different. Like a whisper just passed through your chest before you opened your eyes. Like a memory you've never lived but somehow ache for. That is the beginning. Not of disaster. Not of crisis, but of transformation. And the truth is, it doesn't start outside. It begins in you. Right now, deep within your spirit, there is a wave forming. Invisible, wordless, but undeniable. You may feel uneasy. You may find yourself emotional for no reason. Your dreams may shift. You might suddenly remember someone from the past, or hear a song that makes you cry without understanding why. You might even laugh and feel guilt immediately after, as if joy has to be earned. Don't push these feelings away. They are sacred signals. They are the soul's language when words fail. You are not breaking down, Sagittarius. You are being reformed. The fire sign that you are, the traveler, the truth seeker, the fierce protector of what is right. You've walked too long on the same terrain. And now the earth beneath you is shifting because it's time. Time to rise not just to the next level, but into the life that was marked with your name before you ever arrived here. This may feel like loss, like something is being taken, but what's really happening is subtraction by divine design. The universe is removing what cannot survive in the world you're about to enter. Not to punish you, but to protect your passage, to clear the road, to make sure nothing weighs down the light you've worked so hard to keep alive. And yes, it might feel disorienting. You may ask, why now? But in the oldest teachings, from the Buddha to the Bible to the mystics of every age, there's one truth that echoes again and again. The moment before the miracle feels like emptiness, feels like silence, like being forgotten. But Sagittarius, you have never been forgotten. You have simply been held in waiting, because what's coming to you is rare. It's a frequency only your soul could recognize, a gift that could not be rushed. And before it can be received, the soul must first soften, not to become weak but to become open. I want to tell you something now that only your spirit will fully understand. You are not scared. You are remembering. You are remembering what it feels like to be chosen, not by a person, not by a title, but by God, by the universe itself. And it is this remembering that causes the tremor in your chest. That's why your body feels the shift before your mind can catch up. That's why your routine no longer satisfies you. That's why the things that used to hold your attention now feel dim. Because something is calling you inward. Something sacred. Something immense. And when you go quiet enough, you'll hear it. Not as a voice, but as a pull. Like gravity, but softer. Like a breath being drawn into your lungs that doesn't belong to the world, but to your soul's home. Sagittarius, what you are sensing is not anxiety. It is sacred motion. It is the soul beginning to rearrange itself, not according to fear or memory, but according to destiny. Because in just a short time, Something will arrive that only the new version of you can hold. A truth, a message, a gate. And it is this inner tremor that is preparing you to receive it. Like the soil cracking open before the seed pushes through. Like the heart racing before a long-lost love returns. Not from outside but from within. Let me say this gently but clearly. You are not crazy. You are not being overly sensitive. You are not imagining this. You are awakening. And it doesn't have to look like bliss. Sometimes awakening looks like tears for no reason. Sometimes it looks like saying no without explanation. Sometimes it looks like sleeping more, dreaming deeper, or needing solitude like oxygen. Honor that. Honor what your body knows before your mind can make sense of it. And if it helps, write this down as your sacred mantra. I am not falling apart. I am falling into place. Because the universe has not forgotten the deal it made with your soul. The abundance, the message, the miracle, they are all waiting. But they needed you to arrive first, not as the mask, not as the survival version, not as the one who proved their worth over and over, but as the true you, unpolished, unapologetic, unafraid to burn with the fire you were born to carry. This is not the beginning of chaos. This is the beginning of clarity. You are almost there, Sagittarius. And in the next gate, I'll show you what's truly been holding you back. Not fate, not failure, but a forgotten promise you made to yourself long ago. Let's open that next door together. Gate 2, the broken compass. You were never lost, just bound by a promise your soul has outgrown. Sagittarius, have you ever walked through life with this unshakable feeling that no matter how far you go, no matter how brightly you burn, something keeps pulling you back into the same familiar ache? You tell yourself it's different this time, the new relationship, the new goal, the new path. And yet, somewhere along the journey, it begins to echo again. A subtle tension in the heart, a quiet ache in the chest, a whisper you can't ignore. Why does this keep happening to me? The truth is, you've never been lost. You've simply been following an old compass, a quiet vow your soul made long ago, in a moment of pain, confusion, or abandonment. It wasn't something dramatic. Maybe it was a single night when someone you trusted didn't show up. Maybe it was the first time your heart broke, and no one seemed to notice. Maybe you were a child, too young to name the grief, and so your spirit, in its innocence, made a decision. I'll make sure no one leaves me again. I'll become what they need. I'll love harder, give more, try better. Then they'll stay. And so the promise buried itself like a compass into your subconscious. Invisible but powerful. From that day on, many of your choices, who you loved, what you pursued, what you tolerated, were no longer guided by freedom, but by the silent urgency of that vow. Even your goodness, even your generosity, even your strength were shaped around that hope. That if you just became enough, if you were just light enough, soft enough, unbreakable enough, the past wouldn't repeat. But Sagittarius, here's what no one told you. That promise you made wasn't based in truth. It was born from pain. And anything born from pain, no matter how noble, eventually becomes a cage. You may have mistaken it for strength, but the truth is you've been carrying it like armor. And now that armor is heavy. It doesn't fit the version of you you've become. The compass no longer points to your destiny. It points back to your old wound. And your soul, which has matured far beyond its past, is now quietly rejecting it. That's why everything lately feels off. Why some things you once craved no longer satisfy. Why people who once captivated you now seem to drain you. Why the goals you set with such clarity now feel hollow. It's not because you're confused. It's because you're evolving. The soul is wise enough to sense when the old direction no longer serves the path forward. And in this case, your soul is telling you something you may have never dared to hear before. You don't have to keep that promise anymore. There's a woman I once met who reminded me of this exact journey. She was a Sagittarius in her late 50s. Strong, elegant, fierce in her opinions, and generous to a fault. Her entire life, she had been the one holding everyone else together. The mother who forgave endlessly, the daughter who never rebelled, the friend who always paid for dinner. And yet, beneath all that strength, there was this exhaustion in her voice, like someone who'd been climbing a staircase that never ended. One day, she told me a story from her childhood. A memory of her father walking out the door after a fight with her mother. She was only 9. He turned back briefly, looked at her, then left. She said, "From that moment, I decided I would never be the reason someone walks away again. She didn't cry when she told me. She said it like a fact. But in her silence, I could hear the weight she had carried for 5 decades, all because of a promise her heart made at 9 years old. And now, Sagittarius, I ask you, what promise are you still keeping? What childhood wound still calls the shots in your adult life? Who are you still trying to impress, protect, or redeem through your perfection? The liberation doesn't come from blaming your past. It comes from blessing it. Because the truth is, you survived. You kept going. You stayed kind. You built a life, even if parts of it were shaped around a vow you no longer remember making. But now the compass can be laid down. You no longer have to prove that you are worthy of being kept, loved, or chosen. You already are. There's no grand ritual required. No dramatic goodbye. Just a small, sacred moment of clarity. Maybe it looks like you pausing the next time you find yourself about to over-explain your feelings. Maybe it looks like saying no even when it feels terrifying. Maybe it looks like resting without guilt. Or looking in the mirror and saying, I am not who I was when I made that promise. I am free to choose differently now. Because you are. When the compass breaks, it doesn't leave you directionless. It returns your direction back to where it was always meant to be, your intuition, your joy, your peace. And from that place, you will not walk in circles anymore. You will walk forward, clear, whole, unburdened. In the next gate, you'll discover something else, something even more subtle, but just as essential. Because when you finally begin to rise, when your soul begins to glow again, something curious happens. The past may return not as pain but as seduction, as opportunity, as kindness wearing a mask. In Gate 3, we'll explore how to see through that illusion, and how to recognize the final karmic test before your abundance arrives. But for now, breathe. You're doing beautifully. And most of all, you're no longer walking toward what hurt you. You're walking toward the horizon that was waiting for you all along. Gate 3, when light arrives, so does the final shadow. Seeing through the disguises that almost fooled you again. Sagittarius, when a soul finally begins to rise, when the inner weight lifts and the breath comes easier, and the old compass is laid to rest, something miraculous starts to unfold. You feel lighter, clearer. You sleep deeper. There's a new rhythm to your days, even if you can't name it yet. But there's something else too. Something subtler. Something you may already be sensing. It's the return of the shadow, but not as darkness. This time it comes dressed in light. It's the one who smiles when you're most vulnerable. The offer that feels too easy. The voice that whispers the exact words your wounded heart still longs to hear. Not because it's true, but because it knows you're still healing. And this is where the final test begins. Not in the chaos of falling, but in the stillness of rising. You've come so far, Sagittarius. You've broken the old cycles. You've begun to trust yourself again. You've quieted the noise. And now, as you stand on the edge of receiving, something from your past may return. Not to destroy you, but to ask, are you really ready? There's a story that reminds me of this moment. A woman I knew, also a Sagittarius, had spent years trying to free herself from a toxic relationship. It wasn't the dramatic kind. No screaming. No betrayal in the obvious sense. But it was slow erosion. Her voice dimmed. Her laughter became rare. She started doubting her worth. When she finally left, it took everything. Years later, just as she had rebuilt her life, new job, new city, new sense of self, he called. I've changed, he said. I've been thinking of you every day. And just like that, all the old memories came flooding back. Not the bad ones, the sweet ones. The way he used to look at her. The way they once danced in the kitchen. And for a brief, trembling moment, she wondered, maybe I should go back. That's how the shadow returns. Not with anger, but with sweetness. Not to wound, but to reclaim what it once fed on, your light. You see, Sagittarius, when you begin to glow again, unawakened energies feel it. Not just people, but patterns. The karmic loops that once bound you, they stir. They sense your freedom and they come not to fight, but to seduce. Because if they can't hold you by force, they will try to return through invitation. And it's never the obvious ones. It's the one who says just the right thing at just the wrong time. It's the business opportunity that sounds perfect, but asks you to dim your truth. It's the friend who only calls when they need your strength, but never stay to support your own. And the danger isn't in falling for them, it's in doubting your intuition when it whispers this doesn't feel right. You've learned to survive betrayal. Now, you must learn to recognize illusion. This is the moment when your soul becomes your compass. Not logic, not memory, not guilt, just the deep, subtle frequency within you that says this path leads home, this one leads backward. And sometimes that guidance won't make sense to your mind. You might find yourself saying no to what once would have thrilled you. You might walk away from a door everyone else is begging to open. You might stand in silence while someone tries to pull you into an old emotional contract. And you'll feel the tremble of your old self wanting to apologize. But you won't. Because now you know true light never asks you to shrink. True love never rushes your healing. True opportunity never compromises your soul. In spiritual teachings, this moment is described in many ways. The Buddhists call it Mara's final temptation, the shadow offering illusions of comfort just before enlightenment. In Christian mysticism, it's said that even the devil can appear as an angel of light. In astrology, it is Neptune in its duality, offering vision and deception in the same breath. And in your life, Sagittarius, this moment comes when you are closest to crossing into a new chapter. So how do you protect yourself? Not by closing your heart, not by isolating, but by deepening your discernment. That's your greatest protection now, not armor but awareness. The ability to hold someone's hand while still listening to your inner voice. The courage to walk away before the pain begins, simply because your energy says no. This is your final refinement, because what's coming next is real. It's the message, the abundance, the love. But it requires a version of you that can no longer be fooled by what only looks like healing. It requires you to recognize the difference between peace and people-pleasing, between chemistry and karmic reattachment, between almost right and divinely aligned. And you're ready. How do I know? Because you're still here. Because you've felt the tremor. You've laid down the old promise. You've watched the storm without trying to outrun it. And now you're standing at the edge of the horizon. Not with desperation but with clarity. And clarity is the shadow's greatest enemy. It dissolves illusion. It makes the mask fall. It leaves only truth behind. Sagittarius, if someone or something returns to your life right now with bright promises and warm familiarity, pause. Ask your soul. Do I feel peace? Or do I feel the need to prove myself again? Do I feel expansion? Or am I shrinking to make this fit? Am I glowing because of them? Or am I glowing despite them? The answers will be quiet, but they will be true. And that truth is your way forward. You've already done the hardest part, saying no to your old self. Now comes the beautiful part, saying yes to what was meant for you all along. In the next gate, Sagittarius, we cross into the space where that yes becomes real, where the message you've longed for finally arrives. Not from the world, but from the sacred. It's waiting. It's ready. And this time, so are you. So breathe deep, because you didn't come this far just to hesitate now. You came this far to be free. Gate for the whisper that changes everything. When the message doesn't come in words but in stillness. There's a moment in every soul's journey when the searching becomes still. Not because you found what you were looking for, but because something deeper than answers begins to unfold. Sagittarius, you are arriving at that moment. Not at the finish line, but at the gate of return. For so long, you've sought messages outside of you. You've scanned the sky, read the signs, followed intuition like a flame in the dark. You've begged the heavens for confirmation. Is it my time yet? Will I ever receive the reward for what I've endured? And somewhere in that journey, you were taught to expect the answer in dramatic forms. Through voices, through miracles, through undeniable proof. But now, something softer is approaching. And to receive it, you must do the one thing most fire signs find hardest of all. You must become quiet. You must surrender your effort. You must let yourself feel, not force. Because Sagittarius, the message you've been waiting for, the true message, is not a prophecy or a breakthrough wrapped in thunder. It is a frequency, a shift, a memory your soul has always carried, now finally returning to the surface like a melody you forgot you knew. Comes when you stop asking. It arrives when you stop demanding. It appears not with logic, but with resonance. One night, I spoke to a Sagittarius man in his 60s, a widower who had spent nearly a decade searching for meaning after his wife passed. He traveled. He studied. He volunteered. He tried to live a life of purpose, but something always felt unfinished. Then one night, in a moment so ordinary it barely seemed worth remembering, he sat alone by a window during a storm. No phone, no book, no effort, just stillness. And in that moment he told me he suddenly heard her voice, not out loud but inside. Not a sentence, not a message, just a presence, a warmth. He broke down in tears, not from grief but because he realized he hadn't been alone the whole time. He just hadn't known how to listen. This is what I mean when I say the sacred doesn't scream. It hums. It enters through the quiet space your pain once filled. It reaches you in the silence between one heartbeat and the next. And right now, Sagittarius, that space is opening. You might have noticed it already. The strange dreams that feel like déjà vu. The number that repeats. The way your body suddenly goes still when someone speaks truthfully or dishonestly. You might wake up from a nap and forget for a moment where you are, and feel oddly at peace. These are not accidents. They are invitations. Your soul is being gently recalibrated. Not to do more but to become more. Not to perform your healing but to live it. And in that becoming, the long-awaited message begins to reveal itself, not as a prediction of the future, but as a deep knowing that the future has already begun. Because the truth is, the message isn't coming. It has always been with you. It just needed you to become still enough to remember. Do you recall the moment as a child when you felt wonder for the first time? The way a starry sky could silence your thoughts? The way your laughter used to echo in your own ears like music you didn't know you could make? That was the message. Do you remember the first time you said no to someone and meant it? The trembling in your chest, followed by that rush of sacred relief? That was the message. Or the day you chose to rest instead of pushing through, and for the first time, felt your soul say thank you. That too was the message. Sagittarius, you've been receiving it in pieces all along. But now the final thread is weaving itself into form. Not in the sky, but in your breath. Not in a sign, but in a knowing. There is nothing you need to do to receive it. No action to take. No spell to cast. Just stay here. In your body. In your spirit. Let go of the belief that blessings only come through struggle. Let go of the belief that you must get it right in order to be worthy. You already are. You always were. And if, right now, you're feeling an odd sense of emptiness, not sadness, not loss, but the kind of quiet that settles just before something begins, that is the doorway. That is the holy pause before the arrival. Don't rush it. Sit with it. Let it wrap around you like a forgotten embrace. Because something is unfolding behind the scenes. Something that can't be explained by cause and effect. It's the sacred economy of the universe at work. The slow, perfect restoration of every tear you cried in silence. Every act of love you gave without return. Every truth you whispered when no one else was ready to hear it. What's coming is not just abundance. It's rebalancing. It's everything your soul gave, coming back in a form that won't ask you to bleed for it. And maybe that's the hardest part of all, to trust that it can be easy now. That it doesn't need to hurt to be holy. That joy doesn't have to be earned. Sagittarius, the fire in you was never meant to burn you from within. It was meant to guide you home. And now home is calling. Through the sound of rain. Through a stranger's unexpected kindness. Through a line in a book that seems written just for you. Through the dream that ends with you smiling instead of waking in tears. That's how the message comes. Like a key placed softly in your hand. Not with instructions, but with invitation. And you'll know exactly where it fits. In the next gate, we will step across that threshold together. Into the abundance your soul has waited lifetimes to claim. But for now, stay right here. In this silence. In this stillness. In this holy waiting. You are not missing anything. The message is already here. And it is written in your name. Gate 5, the abundance that was always yours. Not a reward but a return. There is a strange feeling that arrives just before the miracle. It doesn't feel like fireworks or certainty. Feels like quiet. Like the softest question whispered from somewhere inside your chest. Asking, is it really my time now? Sagittarius, you've asked this question more times than you can count. And most of the time you didn't dare speak it aloud. Not because you lacked faith, but because a part of you had grown used to waiting. You taught yourself to stay calm while others were celebrated. You clapped for people who received the very things your soul longed for. You smiled, even when life gave you the smaller share, the delayed answer, the silence where you'd hoped for a sign. And through it all you held on, not with clenched fists, but with a heart that refused to harden. That is why what's coming to you now isn't a prize. It is restoration. It is not a result of doing more. It is the consequence of being someone who, despite every betrayal, every disappointment, every long night with no answer, still chose to believe in light. There's something the world often forgets about abundance. It is not loud. It is not always grand. It does not always wear the clothes of money or achievement. Sometimes abundance is simply the return of peace to a soul that was once torn open. Sometimes it is the moment you look around your life and no longer feel like you are begging for a place at the table. Sometimes it's the first time you laugh without the sound of old pain following close behind. Sagittarius, your abundance has already begun. You may not see it all yet. It may not have arrived in the form you expected. But look closer. Notice how certain people have fallen away, not because you pushed them, but because your spirit stopped bending to make them comfortable. Notice how certain ideas you used to chase now feel unimportant. Notice how your energy no longer scatters trying to please everyone. That is abundance. The kind that begins with internal wealth. The kind that grows without performance. The kind that cannot be taken away. You were never behind. You were never forgotten. Your timeline has always been divine. The pain you carried was not a detour. It was the tilling of the soil. And now the ground is ready. The seeds have broken open. The rain has passed. And the harvest is finally visible. But here's what might surprise you. The abundance that's coming won't arrive with applause. It will arrive with clarity. It won't make your heart race. It will make it settle. And you may even feel unworthy of how easy it feels. Because for so long you believed that good things had to be fought for. That joy had to be deserved. That safety came only after exhaustion. But that belief was never yours. It was passed down through family lines, through collective trauma, through a culture that worships struggle and mistrusts ease. But ease is not weakness. It is the language of a soul that has remembered how to receive. I once sat with a Sagittarius woman in her 70s. She had lived through war, poverty, widowhood, and the loss of her child. For decades, she worked every job she could find, never asked for help, never stopped moving. When I met her, she was retired, alone in a modest apartment. But her face glowed with something I couldn't explain. I used to think God forgot me, she said. Then one day I stopped asking. I started painting again. I took walks. I forgave myself for things I did at 20. And suddenly it felt like something let go of me. Or maybe I let go of it. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. But when she showed me her small backyard garden, she said something I've never forgotten. I never thought I'd live long enough to feel light again. But it came. It came so gently I almost missed it. That's what abundance looks like when it's sacred. It doesn't crash through the door. It opens it quietly and waits for you to notice. And now, Sagittarius, that door is standing open. You don't need to rush toward it. You don't need to convince yourself to be grateful. The real abundance will meet you exactly where you are. It will arrive in the moment you stop striving to earn it. It will reveal itself the first time you rest and don't feel guilty. The first time you look at your life and no longer compare. The first time you give yourself permission to begin again without shame. Yes, there may be tangible blessings too. A new home, an offer, a love that doesn't ask you to shrink. But the deepest wealth is what happens inside when the soul no longer waits for validation to feel worthy. You have already paid the price. Not in suffering, but in staying soft through it. And now, the world that once asked you to earn your place is becoming a stage upon which your presence alone is enough. There is no checklist for what's coming. No deadline. No specific manifestation ritual. Just this: stay open. Stay available to receive what you do not need to chase. And if you feel a part of you resisting it, saying you haven't done enough, haven't healed enough, haven't sacrificed enough, that's okay. Smile at that voice. Thank it for protecting you. Then gently tell it the truth. The waiting is over. The lesson is complete. The door is open. And what's waiting on the other side has your name on it. Not as a reward, but as a return. In Gate 6, we will step into what that return truly means, not just for you, but for the soul of the world. Because when a Sagittarius rises without resentment, when you reclaim joy without apology, something shifts in the collective. You don't just receive the abundance. You become it. And others feel it. Others remember who they are because you remembered first. And that, dear one, is the truest wealth of all. Gate 6. You are the light now. Becoming the miracle you once waited for. There comes a moment on every sacred path when the seeker becomes the source. Not because you've mastered every lesson or healed every wound or walked through life untouched, but because somewhere along the way, your soul stopped asking to be rescued and began to remember its own radiance. Sagittarius, this is where you are now. You've spent lifetimes holding your fire back, trying to be understood by people who were never ready to see your depth. You learned to quiet your joy so others wouldn't feel small. You learned to question your intuition so others could feel right. And still you stayed. You stayed kind. You stayed open. You stayed curious even when life gave you 1,000 reasons to close. But something has shifted. Slowly, softly, unmistakably. The girl who once bent to make herself smaller in the name of belonging no longer fits inside that shape. The man who once measured his worth by how much he could give without receiving no longer finds meaning in that silence. The soul that once begged the universe for signs is now writing its own. You are no longer the one who needs to be chosen. You are the one who chooses. And what you choose now carries weight. Not just in your life but in the lives of others. Because whether you realize it or not, your very presence has become a permission slip for those around you. When you speak without apology, someone else remembers they can too. When you rest without guilt, someone else reclaims their breath. When you love without needing to be needed, someone else remembers love can be free. This is how healing spreads. Not through sermons or solutions but through resonance. Through the quiet frequency of a soul who has returned to itself. You may not feel ready to lead. You may still feel tender, unsure, in progress. But leadership in this age isn't about having answers. It's about having presence. It's about being so rooted in your truth that others feel safe stepping into theirs. It's about knowing that your story, exactly as it is, with all its cracks and brilliance, is already medicine. I once met a Sagittarius artist who'd spent most of her life hiding her work. She was terrified of being seen, convinced she wasn't good enough. For years she painted in secret. Then, after her mother passed, she began posting her art online. Not to sell, not for fame, just as a ritual of remembrance. Within months, strangers began reaching out. Not to praise her technique, but to tell her that her paintings made them cry, made them feel less alone, made them remember something they had lost. She never saw herself as a healer, but she was. Not because she fixed anyone, but because she dared to be visible. And that's what this gate is about. Visibility. Not in the superficial sense, not about followers, not about recognition, but about living in such full integrity with your spirit that you no longer disappear in rooms that weren't made for your fire. It's about knowing you were born to carry light, and no longer dimming it for anyone's comfort. It's about showing up, again and again, even when your voice shakes. Especially when your voice shakes. Because Sagittarius, the world is watching you. Not to judge, not to compete, but to remember. There are people right now on the edge of giving up, who will find their strength in watching you rise. There are souls still stuck in patterns you've already walked through, waiting for proof that the pain has a purpose. And your life, your light, your presence, that is the proof. And if you're wondering, what if I'm not ready? Let me tell you this. Readiness isn't about certainty. It's about honesty. If you're willing to keep showing up with your truth, even when you feel unsure, then you are ready. You don't need to be healed to be helpful. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. You only need to be present, to live in alignment, to choose love over fear, truth over silence, expansion over safety. You've already done the heavy lifting. You've faced the loss. You've held your own heart in your hands. You've walked through the fire and emerged not with bitterness, but with deeper compassion. That was your initiation. This is your return. So now what? Now you stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop questioning the nudges that have been trying to move through you for years. You stop asking if you're too late, too old, too much. You are none of those things. You are exactly what this moment in history needs. You are the living memory of what it looks like to rise without resentment. You are the testimony of what it means to carry a wound without becoming it. And if you ever forget, if the world makes you doubt again, just close your eyes. Return to your own fire. Feel the pulse of your breath. Remember the sound of your own soul speaking. Not in words but in knowing. That is the only compass you need. That is the only voice you must answer to. Sagittarius, you are not here to follow the path. You are here to light it. And the time for hiding is over. You've crossed the river. You've earned your wings. And now it's time to fly. Conclusion. The journey has returned you to yourself. Sagittarius, if you've made it here. If your soul stayed with this message through every tremor, every memory, every truth whispered between the lines, then something extraordinary has already begun within you. Not a change but a return. Not a breakthrough from outside but a blooming from within. This was never about becoming someone else. It was always about remembering who you are beneath the survival, beneath the performance, beneath the old promises you outgrew but never questioned. In this journey you've watched your past rise not to haunt you, but to release you. You've seen illusions appear in golden robes, only to be unmasked by the sharp clarity of your intuition. You've said no with grace, yes with sovereignty, and stood still long enough for the message to find you, not as a voice, but as a vibration of truth echoing through your chest. You've learned that abundance is not something you earn, it's something you finally stop resisting. And most of all, you've stepped out of the story of the seeker, and into the presence of the source. Now you are the light, not the borrowed light of someone else's validation, not the performance light of endless giving, but the quiet, steady, unshakable flame that knows its own worth. You don't need to chase, prove, or plead anymore. You don't even need to hope, because this is the moment when hope turns into knowing, when longing dissolves into presence, when the journey stops being a search and becomes a sacred return. If your heart is still and your breath feels softer than before, then your soul is already whispering, you made it home. And home, dear Sagittarius, was always within you.